I'm going to start with, where were we 2 years and 4 months ago? This is a photo of Dan pointing to me, pointing to Simon Wardley. So if someone can get a photo, then Dan, in your talk next year, you can include a photo of me pointing to a photo of you, pointing to a photo of me, and we'll see how many years we can keep that going for. And it really does feel like 30 minutes ago. It really does. So I was speaking to someone earlier, and they said, oh yeah, I saw you talk yesterday. No, it was 867 days ago. Thank you, Owen. So I'm going to talk to you about organising for outcomes. The subtitle is Organisational Patterns, because there is no one-size-fits-all. The subtitle is Organisational Topologies. Is Manuel still around? Hi, Manuel. So, call out to Manuel and Matthew for team topologies. So this is like a build on team topologies and on project to product. Health warning, smoking, rigid, one-size-fits-all, forced org design seriously harms you and those around you. There is no playbook or blueprint, contrary to what some people will tell you. There is no playbook. Organizations are complex adaptive systems, as Dan said, requiring emergence and experimentation. That's just how it is. There is no one-size-fits-all. There is no playbook. Subtitle, The Matrix Org Reloaded. Don't be Agent Smith. Be Neo or Trinity. So why? So this is the why for organizational redesign. Let's have a quick show of hands. Have you, or are you, put your hand up if you have embraced squads, tribes, chapters, guilds, value streams, fleets, crews, whatever language you're using. Whether you have or you are, show of hands. Oh my God. So if anyone's watching live, that was the majority of the audience. This is really interesting. We are so fortunate to be alive at this point in time, because this is literally a once in a 100-year change, as I'm going to show you. I was surprised by how many hands went up. For the hands that didn't go up, are you kind of still in functional silos? Or are you just unemployed? A functional silo. I saw one hand go up, thank you. So, according to Atomic Agile, these are the reasons for reorganization. New executive manager onboarded, 49%. Teams have been stable for longer than 6 months, so we need to change them. And 2% of answers, dependencies need to be removed. Now I'm going to change that one on the top right. 49% of organizations are doing a reorg for cost cutting. I hear the S's. I hear the amen. So there are a lot of organizations doing a reorg, adopting squads, tribes, chapters and guilds, or value streams, or whatever language you want to use, where really it's a cost-cutting exercise. And maybe that's explicit, or maybe it's implicit. And the one at the bottom, I'm going to rename that one to, we'd like to alleviate impediments. So rather than dependencies need to be removed, instead, slight change in the language, we would like to alleviate impediments. That is what I'm going to focus this talk on. How do we alleviate impediments? And so the question is, what are you optimizing for? That was the topic of my talk yesterday, in 2019. Available on YouTube. Every organization is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. A quote from Arthur Jones. So the question is, are you getting the outcomes you want? Is anyone getting the outcomes they want at their organization? Show of hands. Oh, yeah, okay, 3, 4. Okay, that's good, excellent. Look forward to hearing your talk in November. Can't wait to hear your lessons learned and your journey. And if not, do you know the outcomes that you want? Does anyone know what outcomes they're going after? Does anyone know what the answer is going to be? Can anyone guess? Thank you, Adam. And if you do know them, so roughly, very rough order of magnitude, 1% of companies know what outcomes they're actually going for. 1% of the 1% are actually measuring them. So if you do know them, are you measuring them? That's just my rule of thumb. So, surprise, surprise, focus on the outcomes. And what I would recommend, what I have found to work in every context so far, is a balanced set of outcomes such as better, value, sooner, safer, and happier. Better is quality, value is unique, it's why you're in business. Sooner is the heart of agile and lean, it's time to value and time to learning. Safer is agile, not fragile, and happier is happier colleagues, customers, citizens, and climate. And I hope you've managed to pick up a copy of the book. For those of you that want to, I think there might be a few copies still left. So please help yourself to a copy of the book if you haven't had one already. So the anti-patterns. The first anti-pattern is rigid, one-size-fits-all forced playbook with no alignment to measurable outcomes. Does that resonate for anybody? Does anyone want to admit to that resonating? The next one is org design equals transformation. The Spotify model equals agility. We have adopted squads, tribes, chapters, and guilds, therefore we are agile. Therefore we have improved. We are now a butterfly. And the third anti-pattern is cost-cutting-led org design, spans and layers 2.0. The new name for spans and layers. So how did we get here? How did we end up where we are? And what are the impediments? What's the problem statement? So this is the oldest org chart I could find. This is Plan of an Organisation from the New York and Erie Railroad in 1855. This is going back 3 technology revolutions ago. This is back to the age of railroad. Now, what I love about this, the leadership team, like the top table, are at the bottom. I really like that. It's kind of like, you know, supporting lines instead of reporting lines, rather than being at the top. It's also beautiful. It's like drawn like a flower. It's incredibly artistic. And when you zoom in, you can see all of the roles, you can see it, and those branches going out are actually the train lines, and you can see all the roles on them. So I really like that. But then we get into Taylorism. So this is 1905, Organising a Factory. I read this book yesterday, skimmed through it. It's available on the internet. And to quote, the brains are at the top. So you now see a pivot where the leadership team are at the top, and this is part of that Taylorist mindset, which is workers are idle, workers are dumb. You know, to quote Taylor, nothing better than a dumb draft animal. And the intelligence is at the top, and that was the mindset at the time. That's how, so all of a sudden we see it the other way around. Now, when you look at these wheels, and by the way, I really like the fact that it's a wheel, because there is a notion of flow here. However, within that flow, which suits the complicated domain of mass production, here we see the functional specialization. So now we have the foreman. This is all part of the functional specialization. So we have the beginning of specialization, which is Taylorism. To quote Clinton Woods, first of all, clearly define authorities within your establishment, then chart those authorities simply and graphically so that every workman knows to whom he is responsible. Then there is no loophole through which a neglectful workman, foreman or executive can crawl. No longer does he have the excuse that he thought somebody else was going to do it. That kind of sums up the mindset of the time. We're going to hold your feet to the fire. Oh, I see some photos. I'll put that back up again. Allow you to get a photo of that. So that's all. That kind of illustrates the mindset. So how it used to be, in quotes. So here we have the head of planning, the head of doing, the head of checking, and the head of acting. PDCA for any Deming people in the audience. However, there are silos of P, D, C, and A, as opposed to little cycles of everybody doing a little bit of P, D, C, and A, or reacting rather than acting. So here we have the business, in quotes, and then we have the messengers, and then we have IT. Of course, no organisation is set up like this today. This is how it used to be. Because we're in the age of digital now, and software has well and truly eaten the world. So this is just for academic, a record of the past. I think it's important to have a record of archaeological history of the past. So very few organisations still set up like this. And of course, you end up with brick walls. You end up with brick walls in between the departments. And that doesn't really optimise for flow. So what do we see? In the context of unique change, rather than in a factory doing mass production, we see feast to famine. We see big batch ways of working, nothing to do, nothing to do, nothing to do, nothing to do. All of a sudden, the big batch comes thrown over the brick wall. All of a sudden, you're working evenings and weekends unsustainably with low quality and low levels of engagement. Work is waiting. Flow efficiency, typically about 6%, which means that work is waiting 94% of the time. That's the typical average, looking at flow efficiency in large companies. Team is by role, not by the flow of value. And it's temporary. So you're not aligned to the customer, you're not aligned to the flow of value. There are low levels of engagement. People are a cog in the machine, as per Taylorism, and you've got no idea who the customer is. That is most definitely not optimizing for quality, value, time to value, safety, and happiness. And this is how a surprising number of organizations used to be set up. So this is what happens. This is the end result. There's the product goal at the top. There's the market needs. There's the beta we released. This is what sales sold here. Post-beta update, and then the actual launch product. That's what happens playing a game of gossip or telephone over those brick walls. So what patterns might help? To quote Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I have an update on the Peter Drucker quote, which is, culture eats absolutely everything for breakfast. The full-on smorgasbord, all-you-can-eat buffet, breakfast, lunch and dinner, and supper. Basically, culture eats absolutely everything. Culture wins. Culture wins over everything. Culture wins over structure. I'm talking about structure, but I'm talking about culture. Culture wins over everything. So a bit of neuroscience. Work has changed, but our brains haven't. Our brains are wired for survival. So our brains are still wired to avoid being eaten by a tiger on the savannah. Two biggest motivators. One, avoid threat. Two, seek reward. Threat and incentive. And this is something that I increasingly, forming my own set of views, but I see this more and more and more. You can pretty much boil everything down, I think, to threat and incentive. So it's such a strong human behavior. So threat is double the strength of incentive. So the threat response kicks in twice as quickly, it lasts twice as long, and it's twice as strong as incentive. So cortisol versus dopamine. So in your brain, humans, if you think when you've had a badly worded email, nastily worded email, or if someone's kind of chewed you up on a call in front of colleagues, in front of peers, think about how you felt. Then think about when you had an email saying, great job, or someone said to you verbally, great job. You know, the strength of feeling isn't as strong as the strength of feeling when you've had a nastily worded email or had a nasty conversation. So humans we experience threat twice as strong as incentive. So you have to really, really, really focus on incentive. You have to double down on incentive and make sure their incentives are in place. And you have to avoid threat. This is where psychological safety comes in. Psychological safety is avoiding threat. So be intentional. Avoid threat and enable incentives. And this is very relevant to how we organize. How people organize determines threat and incentive. And notice my wording there, how people organize, not how we organize people, or not how people are organized. I've written it from an empowerment perspective of how people choose to organize themselves, which is intentional wording, which itself reduces threat and increases incentive. So, culture is a set of implicit incentives. Culture is it's the unwritten rules. It's, whether you're going to fit in, and sometimes you see this like a chameleon. You'll see sometimes people will change their color. People will fit in to a different culture. Culture informs strategy. Culture drives strategy. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Strategy is explicit incentives. So strategy translated into outcomes, into objectives, those are explicit incentives. That drives structure. It is culture, strategy, structure in that order. It is not structure first. Structure is both explicit and implicit incentives. So it's in that order. The real Spotify model is culture. Structure is not. The Spotify model. Squads, tribes, chapters, and guilds. Henrik Nieberg wrote that white paper in 2012, and on the bottom of page 1 it says, by the time you read this, we will be doing something different. So the real Spotify model is the culture and the values from Daniel Ek around empowerment and experimentation. So to illustrate this, in terms of culture driving org structure, which organization is this? Microsoft, yes. Prior to Satya, I think Satya's doing a good job. That was the old Microsoft. What organization is that? Google, any others? Apple, yep. Apple, Steve Jobs, rest in peace, Tim Cook. And which organization is that? Oracle, no hesitation on that one. Oracle are not a sponsor, are they? Yes, so that one's Oracle. And which organization is that? Everyone, yeah. Your organization. Every organization. So the anti-pattern is imposition of org design without considering culture, avoiding threat, or enabling incentives. So your one-size-fits-all playbook. So value. Value, business architecture, informs your people architecture. So your value propositions, your value offerings in your company inform your organizational structure. But it's a two-way thing. Unless you're a startup starting from a genuinely clean sheet, everyone has a current state. Everyone has a point to evolve from. So your value offerings, the reason you're in business, drives your org structure. And vice versa, your org structure drives your value offerings. And your org structure drives your technical architecture, and your technical architecture drives your org structure, which also drives your value. These three things are interrelated. You cannot unpick these three things. Your business architecture, your people architecture, and your technical architecture. So if you have a monolithic set of monolithic teams, you're going to end up with a monolithic business architecture and a monolithic technical architecture. If you have a set of small multidisciplinary teams, you will end up with a componentized, a high cohesion, low coupling, like a series of small business units and technical components. So this is Conway's law. Really important learning. Business architecture equals people architecture equals technical architecture. This is the goal. And when they are not in sync, this is where you have impediments to flow, to quality, to happiness. So all three need to be in sync. Now, technically, Conway's law, any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the org structure. If you have a big monolithic team, it will create a big monolithic design. Technically, that's between the people org and the technical architecture. That was the context within which Conway wrote that. But in reality, it's all three of them. It's business architecture, people architecture, and your technical architecture. So the anti-pattern is imposition of an org design done in isolation without considering your flow of value and your technical architecture. Back to the playbook again. So organizing by value and flow. So this is a pattern, and by pattern, patterns are sometimes useful, usually useful, but there is no such thing as best practice. So I'm going to share with you here some learnings about some patterns that have been observed to help companies, to give organizations a tailwind. Please don't treat it as one size fits all. Please don't treat this, as I've just been saying, as a best practice or one size fits all. You have to experiment in your context. So value stream, I like to use the term value stream, and it has a history from Lean. It was a term coined by Womack and Jones. The original Toyota expression is material and information flow. Now, I actually like, in a knowledge context, that still applies, information flow. Even if we're not on a physical assembly line building cars, it still applies. So this is all about flow, information flow, knowledge flow, value flow. Other words for value stream are tribe, crew, fleet, banana. whatever word works for you in your company. So within the let's look at the anatomy of a value stream. We have value producers and value consumers. I like to use the term value consumer rather than customer because sometimes your value stream is internal to your company. And I don't think it is necessarily great language to call your colleagues a customer because it kind of leads to order giver, order taker type mentality. So there are consumers. And if you're a platform, if you have a reusable platform inside your company, you don't want to call your colleagues customers. They are consumers. Producers, long-lived multidisciplinary teams. So no longer do we have these role-based silos. We now have multidisciplinary teams aligned to the flow of value, which is the next point, value. So here we have a thing of value, products, and that's both business and technology. So for example, in financial services, the product could be a mortgage. The technology product could be a mortgage processing system. In the case of an energy company, it could be renewable energy. Could be the business product. The technology product could be to do with how we are charging our customers for the use of renewable energy or signing up for renewable energy. So there are both business, back to the point before around business, people and tech. Value is both business and tech, and here are the people. There is data, and there are processes. There are customer journeys or consumer journeys within your value stream. So the trick here is to think about this as a bounded context. There's no right or wrong here. It's a bit of experimentation and iteration. Think of this as a bounded context of value. You're trying to find something which is, has one job to do it well with minimal dependencies. The pattern which I have found to work in terms of leadership is 3 roles at every level. You have your value outcome lead, which is the why and the what, also known as a product owner. You have your team or value stream outcome lead at the team level, also known as a scrum master. So this role is focused on the how are we working, continuous improvement in how we do what we do. And then you have the architecture outcome lead, which is business architecture and technical architecture. And then you have your multidisciplinary teams. Outcomes, so a value stream will have some OKRs, objectives and key results. So then you have high alignment. You have multidisciplinary teams and you have high alignment on what the goal is. And you have capacity funding. So we are not funding projects anymore. This is the project to product. We're not funding projects, we are capacity funding the flow of value. And the trick here is to pull your OKR or your work in order to maximize value for your level of funding. Roughly once a quarter, you might load balance the funding. That's the kind of, I wouldn't do it any more than that because it's people on the whole. So value stream, long-lived teams of teams, multidisciplinary, aligned to the flow of long-lived value and long-lived value consumers. High cohesion and low coupling, one job to do and do it well with trying to break dependencies. So the learning here is don't manage dependencies, break them. 3 leadership roles at every level. Fast time to decision making. So this is really, really important. There are some organizations where with a consensus culture, it kind of takes forever to make a decision and involves 15 people and 15 departments. So the goal here is you can turn on a dime. So you can have really quick decision making. You have an outcome roadmap. You have high alignment and high autonomy. The outcomes provide the high alignment. And you have one source of work, which is the value stream. So this is really important. When companies, where there are some anti-patterns here, when the work is coming from multiple directions, when it's coming from the role-based silo and it's coming from the tribe or the value stream. So work should only flow through the value stream, not from the role-based silo. So when you zoom out of that, value streams are nested. And like I said, they're funded. So value streams are nested. Same name, not a fixed hierarchy, not forcing 4 levels. So if you call them apple, orange, banana, grapefruit, what ends up, you end up forcing your organization into 4 levels in the hierarchy. And what can happen is there might be some teams who don't need 4 levels, who end up actually inflating the number of levels they have in order to match the fixed hierarchy. So if you just call them all value streams, and they're all nested, just call it all the same word, some might be 2 deep, some might be 3 deep, some might be 4 deep. So I wouldn't give it, different name at every level. And this is your primary team identity. It's long-lived, so if you bump into someone when you're in the office or you're speaking to someone, where do you work? The answer should be, I work in mortgages, I work in gas and low carbon, I work in trench coats, whatever industry you're in. Not I work in IT, or I work in pricing, or I work in marketing. So from a team topologist perspective, this is stream-aligned teams. And then at the bottom here, we have the shared service value streams. Shared service value streams support the consumer-facing value streams. So they are internal. There are 4 levels of federation. One end of the spectrum, completely decentralized. Other end of the spectrum, completely centralized. Neither of those are good. Decentralized, random Brownian motion. Completely centralized, first in, first out queue, doesn't optimize for flow. In the middle, you have solid line, dotted line, solid line. So you might belong to a shared service value stream, be on loan to a consumer-facing value stream. In one of those models, you have a solid line into your shared service value stream and a dotted line into the one you're on loan. And the other way around, you have a solid line into your consumer-facing value stream and a dotted line back to your shared service value stream. That last one, I think, is the ideal target state to get to, but you don't get there overnight. And this is platform teams building on team topologies or in team topologies. And then over on the right, you have your COEs, you have your chapters. These are your craft, these are your specialism. For example, product, engineering, quality, pricing, design. This is the old role silos, but they are no longer your primary identity. So these are a COE. This is your guild. This is your chapter. This is your competence. Watch out for Agent Smith in the Matrix. Like, you don't want work coming in from the COEs. So the anti-pattern I see here is there's work still coming in from the role-based silos, and there's work in the value stream, and that's not a good place to be in. So the work should flow in the value stream. You then have specialist enabler teams. So those specialist enabler teams are where you don't need these skills all of the time in all of the value streams. For example, a safety team, InfoSec, cyber, data privacy, fraud, anti-money laundering, low latency network specialists, whatever that specialist skill is. A ways of working enablement team is an enabler team. And in team topologies, this is called enabling teams. And then you have your communities of practice. Communities of practice are voluntary, law of 2 feet, open invite. Where I worked previously, we had 37 communities of practice with 15,000 people in them. Totally open invite, totally law of 2 feet, and it's fantastic for sharing knowledge across a company. So in terms of interface to the customer, this is a value stream network. So value streams, they don't all necessarily stand alone, and you have an interface to the customer, to the consumer, and you will have channels. So you'll have web, mobile, branch, store, call center, post, whatever else. And this comes back to people architecture matches the business architecture, matches the technical architecture, because from your channels at the top, you can programmatically, should you wish, you can call into those value streams. So rather than me have to apply for a credit card and a mortgage and a current account 3 times separately, I can do it once. And that channel will serve up the entire company for me. Or if I'm a client of an energy company, and I want to sign up for some renewable energy, and I want some lubricants for my machines, I can do that in one transaction through one channel without having to contact multiple different people. So this again illustrates business, people, and technology all in line. So how do you get there? Number 1, focus on the outcomes, not on org design for the sake of org design or cost cutting. Invite over inflict. Start small and start, because sometimes they start small, but not actually starting. So have a bias to action, because complex adaptive systems. Experiment in context. There is no best practice, there is no one best way, so experiment in your context. Iterate, you will get it wrong. So the mistake I made when doing this in the past, we took too long to design the perfect set of value streams, and then we got it wrong. So When we did it time 2, 3, 4, and 5, we deliberately went quickly. We told everyone we're going to get it wrong. We iterated quickly. You know, and we had one scenario, we had too few value streams with too many products in them. In another scenario, we had too many value streams with too few products in them, and we iterated and we found what worked in context. Minimal viable guardrails, so a wide road with high curbs, so keep it loose. You know, keep it loose with minimal viable guardrails. And don't be Agent Smith. Thank you very much.